This video was brought to you in part by SD Bullion.
At SD Bullion, our everyday low prices are already lower than the big boys' so-called flash sales. One of the fastest growing bullion companies in the country, SD Bullion, just claimed a spot on the prestigious Inc. 500. So you have to ask yourself, why haven't you joined over 30,000 new customers who've recently made the switch to SD Bullion for the lowest gold, silver, and platinum bullion prices? To learn more, go to www.sdbullion.com and enjoy the lowest prices in the precious metals industry, period.
Hey everyone, I just launched a new website, financeandliberty.com. Please follow the link in the description of this video and subscribe to our free newsletter, where you can keep up to date with all our original interviews, along with some of the best financial videos and articles from the web. Hey everyone, this last March 2016, I interviewed G.Edward Griffin, the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island. I thought I'd bring this interview back today for our new viewers and those who didn't catch this interview when it was released. This interview is still extremely relevant today, and Mr. Griffin is always an amazing guest to have on. He has just amazing insights. I really hope you enjoy this interview, and please let me know what you think of it in the comments.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah Johnson with financeandliberty.com. And back with us today is a very special guest, Mr. G.Edward Griffin, the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, a second look at the Federal Reserve. Mr. Griffin, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, Elijah. It really is. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'd first like to discuss a little bit about maybe the big picture. If we can look at the big picture first of all. In your book, you lay out two scenarios. You lay out a pessimistic scenario of the future and a realistic scenario of the future. In the pessimistic scenario, you outline how there would be a banking crisis and then the Fed would step in and cause massive inflation in the U.S., and that basically the world would reject the U.S. dollar and the U.S. would return to a barter system, and this would push America into the third world. Then the UN would introduce money to replace the US dollar, and things like extreme surveillance, a police state, and global totalitarianism would emerge. But you also present in your book ways we can avert this pessimistic scenario. So, since you wrote your book, did you want to discuss or share with the viewers what track you think the US has been on? Have we been on more of the pessimistic scenario that you laid out, or are we on track to avert that scenario?
I hesitate to answer this because I know that my answer will be unpopular. In fact, I don't like it myself. But the truth is, I think we are definitely on the pessimistic scenario track. We'll come back to that in a moment. There are positive signs, however, that indicate that the optimistic or the realistic scenario still is a possibility. But in all honesty, we're on the pessimistic track right now. Nothing has really changed because the personalities haven't changed. The same group of people are running the show today and making the decisions that have been running the show and making the decisions for the past couple of decades. So they only know how to do one thing. They don't believe in sound money. They believe in using money as a weapon of literally plunder of the American people to create wealth and power for themselves. And those who are ideologues in that group, who perhaps are not really what you would call of the criminal mentality or deliberately trying to ruin the American people for their own benefit. There are many of those who still are altruistic. They still believe in the Keynesian theories of economics, that the best way to keep the economy bubbling along and the thing that produces the best results for everyone is to keep expanding the money supply and spending through government and that sort of thing. So anyway, regardless of their motivation, it's pretty much the same people that are still in charge. The banks are still running the show. So the short answer to your question is I think we are definitely on the pessimistic scenario track.
Now, getting into some specifics here, late last year we saw the Federal Reserve raise interest rates. Now, I know in the past you've talked about how whatever the Federal Reserve does, they're going to say they're doing it for the good of the American people and to strengthen the economy, but really they're just working for the best interests of the banks. So Why do you think the Federal Reserve actually raised interest rates?
Well, I don't really know the inner workings of those decisions. I think there was probably some pressure from the government side on that, and I don't know that that's the case. But the higher the interest rates are, the more difficult it is to promote the sale of bonds and government securities, which they have to do. We've come to the point now where practically all of the expansion of the money supply is through the sale of government bonds to the Federal Reserve. Well, that wasn't the case not too long ago. When I first became aware of this back in the late 1990s, the ratio of public and institutional purchase of the bonds was quite high. Most of the government bonds were sold to individuals and to institutions and other governments and that sort of thing, because the bonds were considered to be a very sound, riskless investment compared to many others. And even though the interest rates were low, they were considered to be, the gold standard, so to speak, of investments. So, as I recall, the amount of bonds that were actually purchased by the Federal Reserve, which means the quantity of the debt that actually expanded the money supply, was only about 7% of the total. And that means that, 93% or thereabouts was being actually absorbed by the public or institutions and other governments, which does not expand the money supply. Eventually, the money supply has to be expanded in order to pay off that debt. But anyway, that was then. Now you look at it, nobody wants to buy government bonds anymore because they don't have so much faith that the government is going to be able to deliver, or they've figured out that if they do deliver the interest payments will be worthless because by that time, inflation will have eaten away the value of the interest payments. And so it's increasingly more difficult to sell bonds to the public or to institutions and to other governments because nobody wants them anymore. So the Federal Reserve has had to step in and pick up that slack. And now, I don't know what the percentages are, but it's practically all of the government debt is being purchased by the Federal Reserve, which means they're creating money out of nothing to do that. And that is inflationary. That creates money that didn't exist before in order to buy that debt. So, and I think that, I'm just guessing now, that probably there was some pressure to try and raise interest rates so that private buyers would step into and fill some of that void. I cannot think of many other reasons for the Fed to do that. They talk about trying to put a brake on inflation and all that sort of thing, but they don't really mean that. You mentioned earlier before what my view is, that since the Federal Reserve is a cartel, and that it really is, people have to understand that it's not a government agency. It's a cartel of banks that have been given many of the powers of government through the Federal Reserve Act. The cartel agreement, in other words, has been made into law so that those who go contrary to the cartel agreement are actually put into prison. So people think that only a government agency can do that, and that's not true. It's just that this federal banking cartel has been given the power of law through the institutionalizing of its cartel agreement in the form of the Federal Reserve Act. So anyway, we're back to the main thing. I think that the Federal Reserve is sensitive still, trying to increase the demand for the debt on behalf of the government. I'm guessing at that. I don't know. I do know this, that in the long run, as long as the same people are in charge, we will always revert back to low interest rates and the expansion of the money supply, because that is the only trick they know. That is all they really believe in. So that's, what they're doing today is not so important. The important thing is, what will they be doing in the long run, over and over and over again? And expansion of the money supply is what we can look forward to.
Right, and even there's been talk of negative interest rates. I know they've tried that in some other countries, for example, around Europe. What is your perspective on that? The concept of negative interest rates is just crazy in my mind. What are your thoughts on that? And do you see that the Federal Reserve will ever implement them?
Well, the concept of negative interest rates is not crazy at all. It's very shrewd. It just depends on whose point of view. You know, from our point of view, it's crazy. It's insane. It's criminal because it's a means of extracting money from us against our will. We're not willingly paying that. Actually, negative interest rates is a wrong phrase. It gets people confused. All that really is a means of assessing charges and fees to all depositors. Instead of paying interest rates, they say they're going to be charging negative interest rates. That is confusing. What they're really doing is they're just charging a fee for you putting the money in the bank. They say, well, thank you very much. And now your fee for us handling your money and making it available to you in checking account, our fee is such and such a percentage, and they call that negative interest rates. But it's just a fee, a commission. It's a charge. And now in the normal world that we used to live in, people would say, well, the heck with that noise. I've just taken my money out of the banks. Well, that is the very thing that's unfolding now. People are getting very suspicious that the banks are not a safe haven for their money, and that is not a place they want to put their money, their savings, or their wealth. And so they're beginning to take the money out of the banks and find other things to do with them, perhaps hoard some cash, perhaps buy gold and silver, perhaps go and make some other investments in inventories, or whatever it is. They're taking money out of the banks. And that's the reason for this latest rush around the world. Started off in Switzerland, not in Switzerland, but in the Nordic countries. I think it was Sweden. But many countries in Europe are now talking about it. And now the Federal Reserve System and the U.S. banks are talking about it, which is to remove money altogether. The first thing is they're talking about getting rid of the $100 bills. The next would be to get rid of the $50 bills, and then the $20 bills. And then until finally there would be no money left, currency in that sense. When I say money in this case, I'm talking about currency. There's a war on currency so that you will not be able to remove your money from the banks because there'd be no form of money except digital. Now that forces you to have all of your wealth and your savings in the banking system. Now that you don't have any option of taking your money out of the banks, now they can charge you all the fees they want, and the government can step in and collect all the taxes they want. It's just an automatic removal from your checking account. The government and the banks will have first crack at your earnings. The pay won't go to you, it'll go directly into your banking account. So you see where that goes? In other words, the system, this partnership between the banks and the government, will have an absolute first crack at your income stream, and you will get whatever they decide to leave for you afterwards. If you've been a good boy or a good girl and play by the rules, they might just leave something for you.
That reminds me of, what happened in Cyprus, where we saw bail-ins. Do you see that happening as well, besides, possibly negative interest rates and us going to a cashless society, so we have to keep our money in the bank and get stolen from by negative interest rates? Do you see in the future possible bail-ins also?
Well, yes, and that would definitely the plan, and we saw that years ago. They were talking about it at these financial conferences even before Cyprus, so we knew it was coming, and there was quite a bit of backlash, of course, and it's exactly the same thing under a different name as negative interest rates, except that it's more dramatic. The amount of withdrawal from your bank account is huge, and it's all at one time. Rather, with negative interest rates or fees, it sort of dribbles along. But the principle is the same. In other words, it's not your money anymore. It's in the banking system, and they consider it to be their money. And they're guarding it for you or applying it for you according to your discretion, as long as you play by the rules. But they really consider that your money, that we used to consider our money, it belongs to them. And so whether we call it bail-ins or negative interest rates or whatever, or just the government coming in and seizing your bank account because they say you structured your deposits or something, you didn't report anything over a $5,000 deposit, or whatever rules they come up with to seize your money and just say, well, this is now our money. That's the trend, and that's the whole thing behind the cashless society, is so that individual citizens will not be able to escape from it.
Now, I'd like to turn our focus now to the 2016 presidential election. Now, I remember that you've said in the past that simply voting for the right person isn't the solution. So how much do you think the 2016 presidential election could make a difference? I mean, I know I've looked into some candidates, and some of the candidates such as Cruz, Trump, Rubio, and Sanders believe in auditing the Federal Reserve. Now, I haven't heard of them. I know we've talked before about how, auditing the Federal Reserve is not a complete solution. We need to abolish the Federal Reserve. I haven't heard of any of the candidates talking about that yet. But I guess if you look at the candidates, do you see that the 2016 presidential election could make a difference?
No, I see absolutely no major significant difference between one candidate and the other. You may have preferences depending on how much you dislike the other candidates. In fact, that's one of the interesting phenomena of our time, is that people don't vote for candidates anymore. They vote against candidates. They say, yeah, I don't like this guy, but I hate the other guy. And so the whole thing is the lesser of two evils. We've been playing that game for so long, it makes me ill just to think about it. If you have nobody that you really say that represents your point of view, then you really don't have a vote, no matter if you go to the polls or not. You can vote for anybody you wish, but none of those people represent you and your point of view, so you don't have a vote. You have a mechanical vote, but you don't have a vote in principle. So you're disenfranchised. That's where I see we are today. We're disenfranchised. We don't have candidates that really represent the viewpoint of many of us. And I think probably not the majority, but I think the number of people who do not want any of these collectivist policies that are being advocated by candidates, all of the major candidates, they just don't want them. They don't like them, but they have to choose. They think that, well, in a sense, they're only given the choices that are on the ballot, the ones that we see on the debates. People don't realize that those people have been carefully selected ahead of time. And by the time they get to the debates and by the time they get to the ballots, I mean, the selection process is over. We don't really have much choice. And even when we look at candidates like Donald Trump, I think about the only thing that has caught the attention of the American people with Trump is that he's an iconoclast. He's not of the old establishment. He's rocking the boat. And we kind of like to see that. We'd like to see some challenge to this smooth, slick political machine that has dominated both major political parties up until now. So they see Mr. Trump as a means of breaking the grip of that Eastern establishment, and they like that. It's not that they like Trump. In fact, I've talked to very few people that are willing to say, hey, I really like this guy, but they inevitably come down to, well, I like the fact that he's challenging the system and he's breaking the political correctness mold and all that sort of thing. And I have to admit that that's kind of fun to see. But when it comes to what the candidate himself believes or what he would do if he were elected, it's not materially any different than the other major candidates. So the short answer to your question is that we just don't have a vote anymore, and we won't have a vote until we break the grip of the collectivists that manifest themselves pretty much in America through the Council on Foreign Relations. They have a grip over both major political parties. You look at the candidates and the managers and the high officials in both political parties, and you'll find that members of the Council on Foreign Relations are in both of them, and in very high positions as well. So, and the policies, what are the major policies that face America today, the challenges of America? Well, it's our foreign policy. It's the loss of national sovereignty, at least as I see it. We're gradually being swallowed up. America is being actually conquered by the world through this United Nations mesh of treaties and agreements. And gradually other nations are having a say over our domestic affairs. increasingly people are being said, well, we ought to take this person to the Hague and have them tried by the UN and so forth. An American official to be tried by the UN, what does that tell you? That tells you that the UN is superior to the United States and all of that sort of thing. We see this constant loss of sovereignty, loss of our control over our own money. Monetary decisions are being made at a group of bankers. It's not just the Federal Reserve anymore. It's the Bank of International Settlements are making big decisions that affect even what the Federal Reserve does. It's all internationalized. So it's the loss of American sovereignty. Loss of American independence is going on. And which candidates are talking about that? You won't find any of them talking about that. One of the most important issues of our day, and not one peep out of any of them, because it's a taboo topic. Both major political parties agree that America should be absorbed into a world government based on the model of collectivism. And then the other thing, of course, is our monetary policy. It's the Federal Reserve itself, the idea that a cartel of banks can not only issue our money, but determine interest rates and really literally control the nation's economy. Private banks can do that, not even the government. The idea that that's going on is a horrible thing. And what candidates are talking about that? And the answer is none. Mr. Trump says, yeah, I'd like to audit the Fed. Well, that's a laugh. How many times have we seen people say, let's audit the Fed? What are you going to audit? We know what they're doing. It's right out in the open. They're creating money out of nothing. They're sending huge quantities of it to the banks to bail them out. Everything they're doing is legal. So what's the point of auditing? You just learn more about how the machine works. You might uncover some shenanigans where huge amounts are going to foreign banks where we didn't know that before. But whether it goes to foreign banks or whether it goes to American banks, what difference does it make to the American taxpayer? It's all being taken from him, and he never sees it again. It goes to the fat cats, whether they're foreign or domestic. So you see, the two major issues, our monetary system and our sovereignty, both major parties agree totally that we should have our money controlled by a cartel of banks, and that we should lose American sovereignty and become merely part of this new world order run through the United Nations, a global government based on the model of collectivism. So anybody that doesn't like that does not have a vote. It's as simple as that. We do not have a vote, and we haven't had one in quite some time. So until we change that, until we break the grip of these people that have control over our major political parties, we're out of luck. And that's the track we're on now. You asked in the beginning of the program, is it a pessimistic or realistic scenario? Well, it's a pessimistic scenario in my book. We've got to break the grip of these collectivists over our own government.
Now, getting back to that, did you want to discuss some ways that our viewers can take action and try to avert this pessimistic scenario?
Well, yes, that's probably more important than just knowing what the problem is, because if we don't know what the solution is, it's kind of pointless to worry about the details of the problem. I realize that if you don't know what the problem is, then you don't know what the solution is either. But there are two ways of looking at this, Elijah. One is we could just worry about ourselves. Well, we could say the world is going to hell in a handbasket. We can't do anything about it, but at least I can take care of myself. I can take care of my family. And at that level, and I'm all for that, by the way, because we do have a responsibility to take care of ourselves and our families as best we can in the environment we find ourselves. And so there are certain things that you can do. I think you need to get out of debt, although some people will argue if you can use debt to create wealth, then go ahead and do it. And I won't argue against that. But as long as you're using it to create wealth, and wealth supposedly will buy you some security temporarily, go for it. But when I say get out of debt, I'm talking about consumer debt. Let's not worry about having, the very latest and greatest 20,000-foot home if we can't afford it. If we can afford it, I'm all for that too. Anyway, get out of debt, commercial consumer debt. I would say get your savings out of national currencies. All national currencies are going down, down, down in terms of purchasing power. Inflation is eating away on all of them. And when we see in the news, for example, that, well, the dollar went up today, strengthened today, what does that mean? Does it mean it really got stronger? No, it just means that all the other currencies dropped faster that day. In terms of purchasing power, the yen, and the Deutschmark and the pound and all the different currencies are all in free fall. They're all losing purchasing power, but some are losing faster than others. And the ones that are dropping more slowly are often described as strengthening because it's a relative thing. All currencies are losing purchasing power because all governments now have the power through their central banks. They all have their version of the Federal Reserve System in each country. And in that partnership between the politicians and the bankers, they're constantly inflating the quantity of money, and that means that the purchasing power of the unit goes down, down, down. And that's a process that's going to continue until we break the grip of these collectivists that they have over their governments. So that's going to continue, and everybody should see that. It's just as clear as the nose on your face, and yet still people keep their savings and their wealth invested or deposited in these institutions that are all denominated in national currencies. And they realize that, or they should realize that they might be getting 3 or 4 or 5% interest, but the inflation rate is equal to that or greater, usually greater, in some cases much greater. So they're paying a tax. Instead of saving money, they're losing money by playing the game of national currencies. So, and the worst is yet to come. So if you want to avoid that and protect yourself and your family, the best thing is to whatever extent you can, get your savings and your wealth out of national currencies and get them out of the banks, if you can, and put them somewhere else. Well, what that means that there are many options somewhere else. That means usually hard assets. It could mean gold or silver. It could mean inventories. It could mean food. Who knows? There are lots of places that you could put your money where it would gain in value rather than lose in value. So on a personal level, there are things that people can do. But none of that will amount to a hill of beans if the system continues to go down as we now see it. If the pessimistic scenario really plays out all the way to the end, then it won't make any difference how wise you were and how much you defended yourself in the short term. It'll all be taken from you eventually by the totalitarian system that is seeking to gobble us all up. So the only way to protect yourself is really to get into the battle and try and reverse this trend. Become active, become informed, first of all, and then become active in politics. Find candidates who really stand for something instead of just playing the game of get me elected and I'll get this benefit for you and I'll get another benefit for you. All these people are just playing the game of democracy, promising bigger and bigger gifts to various segments of the population so they get votes. They're just buying votes with their own money. The era has come to an end for that kind of thing. We've got to just walk away from those people. But it's still possible. And on the positive side, Elijah, I see that the forces of awakening and regrouping and formation for a counterattack on behalf of liberty are very strong now. It is true that we're still on that other track going to the pessimistic scenario, as you've said. It's still true, and we're moving down that track at an increasing clip. But there's another parallel track, and that's the freedom track. And more people are getting onto that train, and that train is gaining momentum. And I think it's going to be a pretty close call in the next decade, probably. I think this is all going to come to pass in the next 10 years. We're going to see one side or the other will become victorious in this thing. And I don't think you can count the freedom movement out. The number of people who are awakening and becoming active and organizing, such as we are through Freedom Force International, the number of people are getting organized and determined and getting into politics, the number of candidates who are running and being elected, particularly at the local level, is very, very impressive and to me very encouraging. So we have the two sides, and it's a race a race against time, and the finish line is not too far away. In other words, these are pretty exciting times that we're living in.
Definitely. And Mr. Griffin, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we let you go, did you want to share with the viewers any last thoughts you had, and also where they can find you online and maybe get involved in your freedomforceinternational.org and also your other website, realityzone.com?
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, of course. I always forget to do that. And my staff tells me, hey, you didn't do your promotion, did you? And I always forget that. Yeah, this is important. We have several websites. Our commercial website, where we sell books and recordings, and it's information. It's the best information we can find on these topics that we've been discussing, and that's called the Reality Zone. So the website is realityzone.com, and you'll find over 100 really mind-bending documentaries and books on these topics there. realityzone.com, and then the think tank organization that I mentioned a moment ago, where people are getting together and trying to figure out how to reverse this trend. That's called freedomforceinternational.org. It's freedomforceinternational.org. And that's where people come together from all around the world, and we're getting organized, and we're building a counter movement that I believe actually has a very serious chance of turning this whole thing around. So if you really want to look on the positive side and look to a better world, don't forget to go to freedomforceinternational.org. And then for those who just want to sort of tune in and see what's going on over here, we have a free news service, and that's needtoknow.news. Needtoknow.news. And that will keep you up to date on what we think is going on in the world, and we draw our sources from all over the world. A lot of times things happening in the United States are more accurately reported overseas than they are right here in our country. And we draw all of this together, and if you really want to be informed, I urge you to come to needtoknow.news. So there it is, Elijah, and thank you for reminding me.
Once again, Mr. Griffin, thank you so much for your time today.
All right, thank you, and good luck.
This video was brought to you in part by ReluctantPreppers.com.
Click here to watch Reluctant Prepper's latest interview with John Rubino from DollarCollapse.com. In this interview, Rubino discusses how close we are to collapse and whether a Trump presidency will rescue us or hurtle us over the cliff.